Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Mike, host of the free iTunes podcast, Psychiatric Secrets Revealed with Dr. Mike. But that's not why I'm here today. This is another Saving Savvy episode. And in this episode, I'm going to answer questions that newbie photographers may have, basically to counter the lies that they may be hearing from more experienced photographers. Now, by lies, I don't mean that more experienced photographers are actually out there fibbing. What I mean is that sometimes we as experienced photographers simplify what we are saying because it's just easier to say do this or this means that, and it can confuse a newbie who doesn't have a more total understanding of photography. So I came up with a bunch. I put them on index cards. I shuffled the cards up a bit to make it just more interesting. Some of these I think most people will agree with. Some I think will violently disagree with some of the things I'm going to say. If you have comments, please put them down below. Even if they're comments where you disagree with me, that's fine. Just don't be an ass. The world has enough asses in the world. They don't need you to. So here's my list. I'm putting on my glasses so I can actually read these. Question 1. The blank is twice as or 50% better or whatever than the previous model. And this could be the dynamic range of the camera or the focusing speed or whatever. So the reality is that most times when you see these numbers, they may be true, but only in a theoretical sense. Statistically, you can do a lot of things, but what statistics say and what's practical and real are two different things. In most cases, when you look at things like the focusing speed between the previous model and the current model, or the dynamic range, or the low light ability, it's really very, very small. Now, sometimes a dramatic change will happen and there is a significant difference, especially if the two model versions are separated by a number of years. So a camera that came out 4 years ago and now there's a new camera that came out to that, like the new version of that camera. Well, of course, you're going to see dramatic changes. But some cameras come out every few months or every year or so, less changes there. And often you can get a great camera buying last version model because no one wants it because they want that one that's 50% better that's really not going to perform any better. Okay. Real photographers use full frame. So full frame is for most of us the largest size sensor that we can get. Yes, there are bigger formats, but full frame is it. And full frame in many cases will give you better low light performance and better dynamic range than, for instance, a smaller sensor like an APS-C size sensor, but not always, and the difference isn't as great as you think. The one place where a full frame camera comes in that actually does outperform is that you can use, to get the same field of view or the same thing that you see, you can use a longer focal length lens. And by using a longer focal length lens, you can get a blurrier background. But that's not to say that you can't get blurry backgrounds with APS-C sensors, for instance. Just have to fool around a little bit more. So full frame does offer some advantages, less than you think. Real photographers never use the automatic or green mode. Okay, so a lot of cameras, including pro level cameras now, will have a little green automatic mode on them, and people will say, "Oh, never use that. You can't use that button. There's something wrong with you if you do." I would say in many cases it's better to use a more manual mode to get the exact look that you want. But if you're in a pinch, you got to use whatever you have to use. I mean, let's say if I was doing a portrait session, and all of a sudden there was this huge thing that was happening that was action oriented off to the left. I guarantee you I'm going to flip it into automatic because I'm not going to have the time to think about, okay, what am I going to set? How am I going to do what? I'm just going to put it in automatic because I know that's going to get me the best image in that particular setting. So you use what you got to use. I would never use a strap, or I hate straps, camera straps. Well, I hate camera straps too, but I always use a strap. In fact, one time I accidentally dropped a camera. It was an APS-C size camera. It cost me over $350 just to fix the lens mount. So better safe than sorry. This is a video question. You have to shoot in 4K, or I guess maybe 8K now. So 4K is the current highest level of video that you can shoot. And a lot of people say you have to shoot in 4K. I'd say If you want to, go ahead. I never shoot in 4K. I have 4K cameras. I'm actually shooting this in 720p. Shame on me. Why? Because I'm using a crappy webcam, and if I went to 1080, it wouldn't look that much better, and it's easier for my computer to process, and it's easier for me to post. And YouTube's going to take whatever you do and compress it down to heck. So it's better to use a better lens or better lighting or things like that. If you want to use 4K, go for it, but it's absolutely not necessary, and it's not necessary to use on YouTube unless you have some special need. The equipment makes the photographer. So here's the idea. I go out and I buy a $4,000 camera, and I trade in my $2,000 camera. Am I twice as good? Of course not. In fact, if you're new at photography, if you buy, let's say, a basic DSLR or maybe a mid-range mirrorless camera, you will have more camera than you will need for a very, very long time. And in fact, if you get an expensive camera, you might just be confused by all the additional stuff that it does. So it's going to do things that you don't need it to do, and it's going to possibly confuse you. Things that a more expensive professional camera offer are better build, better weather sealing, more buttons that are actual but actual real buttons on the camera that you can press and things. That's great if you're shooting every day. Less necessary if you're going out to do some shots on the weekend or to take photos of your kid playing soccer or whatever. Real photographers use Pro Glass, or maybe brand name Pro Glass, even better. Well, Pro Glass is awesome. It's awesomely expensive, so you can easily spend more on one single lens than your entire camera body. And if you are doing professional work at a professional level on a daily basis, you can afford that because that's part of you could write it off as a tax write-off. But for many of us, using lesser glass, including the kit lens, is just fine. And it's going to be a lot less expensive, and it's going to do the job. And you can tweak those images a little bit in your photo editor and make them look pretty darn good. So don't feel like you have to have like L-level Canon glass or Zeiss lenses and all that, unless you can really afford it or you really have to justify that small benefit that incredible cost is going to give you. I would never use a pop-up flash. This one kind of irritates me. And it irritates me because, of course, if you're doing a professional shot, you're going to use professional lighting. If I'm going to go do a portrait shot of someone, I'm at least going to bring a speed light with me, right? Because I want the broadest amount of light that I can give. But there's been many times when I've been out and about with a camera, and obviously I'm not going to carry a whole camera kit with me, and that little bit of fill that I can get from a pop-up flash turns a crappy picture into a usable picture. So if you got it, use it. Don't get stuck with things like that. I'm going to use the same card again because I actually have another thing that I didn't write down. The other thing would be, I can't believe people are using their iPad to take photographs. Why not? For some people, the camera on an iPad nowadays is not bad at all. It's about the level of a cell phone. So if that's the best that you have, why wouldn't you use it? I'm not saying it's the most ideal form factor to take pictures, and it does look a little ungainly. But if that's the best you have, you're going to get great pictures from it. In fact, having that rear camera on your iPad is fantastic for so many things. If you're a student, you can take a picture of the blackboard or the whiteboard or whatever kind of board they're using to actually, or the slides, so you don't have to write it all down. If you're, let's say, an adjuster, you can take a picture of that dented fender or the shingles off the house or whatever and instantly attach it to an email. So iPads are probably not your first choice when it comes to photography, but if that's the best you have, absolutely use it, and use it with pride. Oh, here's one. Smaller is better. Bigger is better. So this refers to camera bodies. So now there's a big trend to go to smaller and smaller cameras, full frame cameras and relatively small bodies. Before, the trend was to go for these bigger cameras. They each offer their advantages, but a small camera body with a giant lens on it is unbalanced and doesn't really offer any size advantage. A big camera body is much better in those cases because you have the counterbalance of the camera and better grippage and things like that. However, a small camera is great if you're just going into a place where maybe you don't want to carry as much heavy stuff. You're doing a lot of photography that's out in the field. Then a small camera can really be useful, especially if you're not using a giant telephoto lens on it. So use the camera that's right for you. There's no right answer here. Ah, this is the one that will get me hate. So feel free to tell me that I'm wrong, but please be decent about it. Again, we don't want you being an ass. Just write your feelings. I respect your feelings. Respect mine. Real photographers always shoot in RAW. So if you're new to photography, what is RAW? RAW is basically a bag of data from your sensor. It is processed information. It is not just raw data, even though it sounds like that, but it's less processed than, let's say, a JPEG image. In fact, you cannot even view a RAW file on your computer. It has to be converted into a JPEG image first. It offers an advantage in that it has more data. So if you're trying to pull out shadows more or adjust your white balance drastically or something, you're going to have more latitude to do that. But you can do all of those things in a JPEG image, just not quite to that degree. So in some ways, RAW is great if you're a crappy photographer because you have to make huge corrections in your post processing, or if you have a crappy camera. Let's say you have one of those little sporty cameras, those little weather sealed cameras that has a little tiny sensor. Well, then it makes sense to shoot in RAW because the image quality of that little sensor is going to be not so great. You want every advantage that you can get. But if you're shooting properly, you don't really have to shoot in RAW. I almost never shoot in RAW. I shoot only when I have an absolute need to do it. When I think that I cannot compensate just by my skill level, I'll shoot in RAW. Do what you want to do, but don't be afraid. RAW files are huge. They fill up your hard drive. Even though hard drives are cheap, they still fill them up. They clog up your editing programs. Consider JPEG or do what you want to do. You need 40 or 50 megapixels to take a good picture. So cameras nowadays can take pictures. There's some cameras that take just these gigantic files. That's great if you want to focus and crop on a mosquito in the image, but probably unnecessary for most of us. Don't forget, even if you're shooting professionally, a lot of your images will be posted to a website, and those images will be compressed. Facebook and things like that really compress your images. And in fact, I think people will tell you that although it's an apple to orange comparison, but your typical 35 millimeter film had a resolution, depending on the film and the camera, between 4 and 16 megapixels. So if you have a 16 megapixel camera, that has the resolution of some of the top 35 millimeter film images that you could take. I'm talking about print film now, that you could take not that many years ago. So you've whatever you got, if it's 12, if it's 16, if it's 20, you got plenty, unless you're I don't even know why you need that much unless you're doing forensics. My reviews are not biased. You hear this all the time from reviewers. I am an unbiased reviewer. We are all biased. I am biased. Every single reviewer out there is biased, even if we're unintentionally biased, because we are familiar with certain camera brands and particular ways that things are done. We might have a particular focus that turns us on, like we might be interested in low light, or we might be interested in focusing speed or whatever. All those things will bias us on how we view our cameras. I think the bigger biases are now coming when these camera companies will fly you on a junket someplace to an exotic place and wine you and dine you and give you professional models to shoot, and then you go and you post your impressions of that camera on YouTube. Even if you're trying to be very careful, that's going to bias you. I'm a psychiatrist. I know these things. Okay. Phase detection is more accurate than contrast detection. Well, so phase detection is what you see, the focusing system that you see on more expensive cameras. Contrast detection is what you see on, let's say, your compact camera. And there's this idea that it's more accurate. In reality, contrast detection is more accurate than phase detection. It's just slower because it has to go past the focus point and come on back again. So phase detection is also often used in more expensive cameras for the very simple reason that it's very, very fast, and that counts big time. But contrast detection is actually a little bit more accurate. Real photographers always shoot in manual. And by manual, I mean they set everything up from ISO to shutter speed to whatever. Not true. So I will shoot in manual when I want consistent results. So if I'm in a studio session doing portraits and I want every shot to be identical as far as like exposure and all that, I will shoot everything in manual. But when I'm out in the field, I almost never shoot all in manual unless I have time to really think about a static shot because it's just too slow and I can't think that fast. I might shoot in aperture priority. I might shoot in shutter priority depending on the kind of shot that I want to take. I might even shoot in program mode. And as I just said earlier, in rare instances, I'll still use automatic. So you shoot in whatever gets you the shot that you want to get. Oh, this you'll see on a lot of reviews. DP review does this all the time. The image quality is very good, but it has an aging, 16 or 24 megapixel sensor that's long in the tooth. Well, if the image quality is good, the image quality is good. If the sensor is 2 days old or 2 years old or 4 years old, if the image quality is good, the image quality is good. Now, newer sensor technology does offer some advantages. Specifically, there is new sensor design that might, for instance, offload data quicker, which is going to give you faster burst rates, and when you're using it for video, give you less wobbly videos. But for most of us, those are minor concerns. So if the sensor is doing what it needs to do, let's not knock it. Here's my last question. Oh, I actually heard this from a reviewer that I like quite a bit. I think he seems like a very nice guy. It's a husband and wife team. The wife they seem like very genuine people. But he said this comment, and it grated on me. He was reviewing a camera. I'll tell you, it was actually a Sony camera. I think it was the RX7 Mark III, and it has a burst rate of around 10 FPS or frames per second, which is astronomically fast. And he says, "Oh, I wish this was as good as the Sony, which the newest, the most expensive one, which had a burst rate of around 20 frames per second." I think, holy crap, 20 frames per second? Are you kidding me? So a few years ago, the very fastest professional action cameras shot around 10 frames per second. And you would be thrilled to have that rate of speed. You would wet your pants over. People would just say, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe this," right? So yes, indeed, the faster you have, the more you're likely to capture something. But skill comes in here too. If you're just aiming and spraying at 20 frames per second, you are going to burn out even a big memory card. You're going to fill up your hard drive. You're going to have tons of pictures that you're going to have to review. It's a pain in the neck. So yes, I guess there could be times when 20 frames per second is necessary, but for most of us, develop your skill. You're going to get that soccer kid shot. You're going to get that basketball shot, even if it's only shooting at 6 frames per second. So my wife is calling me for dinner. You might have heard her in the background. With that, I would say have a great day. If you have some time, please give my podcast a listen. It's called Psychiatric Secrets Revealed. It includes myself. I'm an MD, board-certified psychiatrist, and my wife was shouting at me to come to dinner. She's a PhD-level clinical psychologist. This last episode that we just uploaded today was on what do you do when your kids go away to college. How do you deal with their transition? How do you deal with your transition? Kind of an interesting show. Also, I do a personal writing blog called drmikekuna.com, drmikekuna.com. It's a lot of my personal feelings, a lot of personal information about me, but I'm also doing a segment where I'm interviewing people so they can tell their stories, maybe a life-changing event or something, a path they took that they either liked or didn't like. I've done a bunch of those stories now. If you have an interest, look at my webpage. Maybe I'll do your story. You just need to email me, and that information is on that webpage. Do that, and maybe you'll wind up in a book if this becomes a book. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.